The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall glass windows of New York Presbyterian Children's Hospital, spilling golden light across the polished floor. The place smelled faintly of antiseptic and soap, but underneath, there was another layer of scent, like crayons and juice boxes, the sort of scent that clung to the walls of a pediatric ward. Nurses moved gently down the corridor, their voices low, careful not to disturb the children resting in their rooms. On that particular day, the halls were quieter than usual, as if the building itself held its breath. David Beckham walked slowly, his polished shoes clicking faintly against the tiles. Even in casual clothes, he carried the air of someone recognizable, but there was no press, no camera, no entourage. Only a simple visit. He had promised his old friend from Los Angeles, Michael, a teammate from a charity match years ago, that he would check in on Michael's daughter, who was undergoing treatment here in New York. Beckham wasn't one to make promises lightly, and even with his busy schedule, he carved out this quiet stop, unannounced, almost secret. His steps slowed as he entered the pediatric wing. The walls were painted with bright murals, smiling dolphins leaping from painted waves, colorful balloons floating among painted clouds. He smiled faintly at the effort, anything to distract children from the reality of four poles and hospital gowns. The laughter of a child floated faintly from down the hall, followed by the beeping of a monitor. Beckham's chest tightened with both hope and sorrow. He stopped at the reception desk. A nurse recognized him, eyes widening, then softening as she realized he wasn't here for attention. He simply placed his hand lightly on the counter and asked in a low voice, "I'm here to see Michael Thompson's daughter." The nurse nodded, smiling, and pointed him toward a communal lounge just around the corner. When Beckham turned the corner, he noticed it immediately. A small tree, more a wooden stand than an actual plant, standing in the center of the room. Paper slips of every color dangled from its branches, handwritten notes tied with ribbons. Some were scribbled in crayon, others neatly written by parents. Above the tree, a sign read in cheerful letters, "The Wishing Tree." Beckham's curiosity drew him closer. He scanned the little notes. "I want to see my dog again. I hope my brother can visit soon. I want to eat ice cream outside." Each was heartbreakingly ordinary, yet full of longing. Then his eyes settled on one written in careful, uneven handwriting, the kind that belongs to a child still learning to steady her letters. "I want to have a picnic with my mom like when Dad was here." The words struck him harder than he expected. For a moment, the sounds of the hospital faded. He imagined a small family on a checkered blanket in a sunny park, the father spreading sandwiches, the daughter laughing with a juice box in her hand. And now, that father gone, leaving behind a daughter who only wanted to feel that moment again. He swallowed, blinking back the sudden sting in his eyes. Beckham had spent years being celebrated for goals, trophies, stadiums packed with roaring fans. But here was a child whose biggest dream was something so humble, so pure, yet out of reach. "Emily," a woman's voice called softly from the doorway. Beckham turned, and there she was. A little girl, her head covered only by a soft knit cap, eyes wide and bright. She was thin, pale, but her smile carried a warmth that defied the hospital setting. Beside her stood a woman, her mother, tired lines on her face, but with the same gentle eyes. "David?" the mother whispered, almost in disbelief. Beckham stepped forward with a small, reassuring smile. "Hello. You must be Emily." The girl giggled, shy at first, then nodded. You're the soccer guy," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. He knelt down to her height, softening his voice. "Yes, I am. But today I just came to meet you. Is that all right?" Emily's cheeks flushed with color as she nodded. He could see the four-pole behind her, the clear bag of fluid dripping steadily, a reminder of the battle she fought daily. But in that moment, she looked only like a little girl eager to share a secret. Her mother introduced herself as Sarah. They moved toward a corner of the lounge, settling onto a couch. Emily clutched a small stuffed rabbit in one hand, its fur worn from years of hugs. She looked at Beckham with eyes that seemed too wise for her age. "So," Beckham said gently, "I saw your wish on the tree." Emily blinked, startled, then ducked her head with a shy smile. "It's silly, isn't it?" "No," Beckham said firmly, shaking his head. "Not silly at all. It's beautiful." Her mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. She explained quietly that Emily's father had passed away 2 years earlier, a sudden illness that left a hole in their lives. He used to take them on small picnics at the park near their home, nothing fancy, just sandwiches, apple slices, and lying on the grass to watch clouds. Since then, Emily had not been well enough to go outside much, and the memory of those picnics became her brightest treasure. Beckham listened, his chest aching with empathy. He thought of his own children, of afternoons in the park, of laughter and little hands tugging at his sleeve. He thought of how fragile those moments could be, how quickly they could turn into memories. He leaned closer to Emily. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes the most important games in life aren't played in stadiums. Sometimes they happen right here." He tapped gently on his heart, "in moments we share." Emily tilted her head, considering his words. Then she grinned. "Do you like picnics too?" He chuckled. "I do. Some of my favorite memories with my kids are from picnics. Sandwiches that get a little squished, juice that spills, ants trying to steal the food, but all of us laughing anyway. Those are the best days." Emily giggled, the sound pure and unguarded. Her mother smiled, brushing a hand over her daughter's cheek. For a moment, the hospital walls faded, replaced by sunlight and grass in their minds. They talked for nearly an hour. Emily asked him about soccer, about London, about what it was like to play in huge stadiums. Beckham answered each question patiently, weaving stories not of fame, but of teamwork, of joy, of family. He wanted her to see him not as a star, but as someone who understood the value of small joys. Before leaving, Beckham reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook. He handed it to Emily. "For your wishes," he said. "Not just the big ones but the little ones too. Sometimes writing them down helps make them real." Emily hugged the notebook tightly. "Thank you." As Beckham stood to go, Emily's voice stopped him. "Mr. Beckham?" He turned. "Do you think wishes ever come true?" she asked, her eyes searching his. He hesitated only a moment before answering. "I believe the best wishes do, especially when people care enough to help." Emily nodded solemnly, as if sealing an unspoken promise. When Beckham walked back down the corridor, the fading sunlight now replaced by hospital lights, he felt a weight in his chest. Not the weight of sadness alone, but of responsibility. He had seen her wish, heard her voice, and something in him whispered that he could not simply walk away.
The city outside roared on with its traffic, its neon signs, its endless rush. But inside that hospital room, a little girl had reminded him of something far greater than the roar of any stadium. A picnic, a moment of ordinary joy, a dream worth fighting for. And David Beckham, once the boy from East London who dared to dream of football glory, now found himself daring to dream again, this time for a child named Emily. The night after his visit to the Children's Hospital, David Beckham sat in his hotel room in Manhattan, staring out at the glittering skyline. The hum of the city was constant, a symphony of horns and sirens, but his mind was back in that quiet pediatric lounge where a little girl with a knit cap had smiled at him with more strength than he could fathom. Emily's words, her wish for a picnic with her mother, played over and over in his head, as insistent as the ticking of the clock on the nightstand. He had been part of grand projects, stadium launches, charity events, global campaigns. Yet nothing felt as urgent as this one small wish. Beckham leaned forward, elbows on his knees, rubbing his face with his hands. He thought of his own children again. Brooklyn, Romeo, Cruz, Harper. He thought of the afternoons when they had sprawled across a blanket in the garden, Harper's hair tangled in the breeze, Romeo kicking a ball even as sandwiches disappeared one by one. Those were the kinds of moments that never made headlines, but filled photo albums. And now Emily, a child whose world was confined by four poles and hospital routines, just wanted to feel that again with her mother. How could he ignore it? The next morning, Beckham returned to the hospital. This time, he avoided the public entrances, slipping in quietly with the help of a staff member who had recognized him the day before. He asked to meet with the hospital's pediatric coordinator, a kind woman named Dr. Rosen, who had a reputation for blending clinical care with deep compassion. She ushered him into her office, her eyes curious but cautious. "I read Emily's wish on the tree," Beckham began, his voice low but steady. "I want to make it happen for her. Not outside, of course. I know that's impossible. But here inside. A picnic." Dr. Rosen blinked, surprised, then leaned back in her chair. "A picnic? In the hospital?" "Yes," Beckham said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Blanket, food, atmosphere. Something to make her forget these walls for a little while." The doctor considered him. She had seen celebrities come and go, often with cameras in tow, but there was something earnest in Beckham's tone, something uncalculated. If we can keep it safe and sanitary, I don't see why not, she finally said. We'll need to coordinate with infection control, of course. Emily is immunocompromised. Tell me what I need to do, Beckham said immediately. By the afternoon, a plan was forming. The hospital staff offered a recreation room that was rarely used in the evenings. It had plain walls, fluorescent lighting, a couple of couches, and a table for board games. Hardly a park. But Beckham could see it in his mind transformed. Red and white checkered blankets, picnic baskets, maybe a projector showing a sunny meadow on the walls. He pulled out his phone and began making quiet calls. First, he reached out to a local event designer he had once worked with on a charity gala in Los Angeles. She picked up, astonished to hear from him, and even more astonished when he explained the request. It's not a gala, Beckham told her. It's for a little girl. I don't want glamour, I want comfort. Simple, warm. Something that feels like home. Within an hour, she sent him mock-up sketches, a backdrop of rolling hills projected on the walls, fairy lights strung across the ceiling to mimic fireflies, soft picnic blankets sanitized and approved by hospital staff, and baskets filled with carefully chosen food that complied with Emily's dietary restrictions. Beckham studied every detail, suggesting adjustments, less decoration, more authenticity. He didn't want it to feel like a performance. He wanted it to feel real. That evening, Beckham personally went to a grocery store, cap pulled low over his forehead to avoid attention. He wandered through the aisles with surprising care, selecting crisp apples, small packets of chips, bottles of lemonade, and pre-wrapped sandwiches. He picked out cupcakes with white frosting and sprinkles, smiling faintly as he remembered Emily's shy giggle. He added a pack of crayons and a notebook, thinking she might enjoy drawing during the picnic. At the checkout, the cashier gave him a long look of recognition but said nothing, only offering a small nod of respect. Back at the hospital, volunteers began to gather, students, nurses off shift, a few staff members who had heard whispers of the plan. Beckham rolled up his sleeves, helping to push furniture aside, tape wires down, and spread out blankets. He was meticulous, checking the safety of each item. When someone tried to take over the heavy lifting, he shook his head. No, let me. If we're doing this for her, I want to be part of every detail. As the room slowly transformed, laughter and warmth filled the space. One nurse hung paper lanterns in the corners. Another tested the sound system with recordings of birdsong and a soft breeze. Beckham crouched on the floor, carefully arranging apples in a basket, his focus intense. To the volunteers, it was surreal. A global icon kneeling on a hospital floor, fussing over the angle of a cupcake box, his brow furrowed, as if he were preparing for the biggest match of his life. But for Beckham, it felt right. Every detail mattered because every detail was for Emily. Later that night, when the hospital grew quiet, Beckham stayed behind, walking through the nearly finished setup. The room glowed softly under the lanterns. The projected meadow stretched across one wall, giving the illusion of grass and sky. On the floor, 3 blankets lay side by side, waiting for small feet and laughter. He sat down on one of them, just for a moment, letting himself imagine Emily's face when she walked in. The thought brought a lump to his throat. The following day, he met briefly with Sarah, Emily's mother. She was stunned when he explained the plan. Tears welled in her eyes, her voice trembling. You're doing all this for Emily? Beckham nodded. For Emily, yes, but also for you. Because I know it's not just her memory. It's yours too. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, overcome. She whispered, she hasn't had a day like that since her father passed. She talks about those picnics all the time. Beckham reached out, gently touching her shoulder. Then let's bring those days back, even just for a little while. Over the next 48 hours, preparations continued quietly. Staff members were sworn to secrecy. Emily thought she was simply going to the lounge for an art activity. In reality, Beckham and his small team were orchestrating something more meaningful than any stadium entrance he had ever made. On the eve of the picnic, Beckham stood once again in the transformed room. The smell of fresh apples mingled with faint hospital disinfectant, but the illusion of a picnic was almost perfect. He paced the room, checking everything twice. He smoothed the blankets, adjusted the lighting, and even tested the cupcakes by tasting one himself. At one point, He paused near the projection of the meadow. Fireflies glowed faintly in the digital dusk, and for a brief moment, Beckham felt a wave of peace. He whispered under his breath, "This is for you, Emily."
He thought back to the roar of Old Trafford, the blinding flashes of cameras, the whirlwind of fame. None of it compared to this quiet mission to deliver happiness to one child. And as he left the room that night, closing the door softly behind him, Beckham carried with him a sense of anticipation unlike anything he had ever known. Tomorrow, Emily would walk in holding her mother's hand. Tomorrow, her wish would unfold, blanket by blanket, bite by bite, laughter by laughter. And Beckham knew with absolute certainty that this would be one of the most important days of his life. The morning of the picnic dawned with a cool, pale light spilling through the hospital windows, carrying with it a sense of expectation. For most of the children, it was a day like any other. Nurses making their rounds, monitors beeping steadily, the shuffle of feet along polished floors. But for Emily, though she didn't yet know it, the day was going to be unlike any she had ever experienced since her father's passing. David Beckham arrived earlier than anyone else. He carried with him not only a basket filled with fresh apples and sandwiches but also a heart full of nervous anticipation. He had stood before tens of thousands of fans, had felt the weight of a nation's hopes on his shoulders, but never had he been this anxious. This was different. This was intimate, personal, and fragile. He wanted everything to be perfect, not for the cameras or the public, but for one little girl and her mother. The room was ready. The red and white checkered blankets had been spread carefully on the polished floor. A small projector painted a meadow across one wall, complete with drifting clouds and patches of wildflowers. Paper lanterns cast a warm glow from above, softening the sterile hospital lighting. The picnic basket sat neatly, filled with sandwiches, cupcakes, and bottles of lemonade. Around the edges of the room, nurses who had volunteered stood discreetly, ready to help but keeping themselves in the background. They knew this moment was for Emily and for her mother. When Sarah appeared at the doorway holding Emily's hand, Beckham felt his chest tighten. Emily wore her hospital gown under a light cardigan, her knit cap pulled snugly over her head. She looked tired, fragile, but her eyes still held that spark. She glanced curiously into the room, expecting another routine activity. Then her gaze landed on the blankets, the baskets, the meadow glowing on the wall. For a heartbeat, she froze. Then her mouth opened, her hand tightening around her mother's. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "Is that a picnic?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her voice catching as she answered, "Yes, sweetheart, a picnic." Emily stepped into the room slowly, as if afraid the scene might vanish if she moved too quickly. Her eyes darted across every detail, the lanterns, the baskets, the colors on the wall, until they landed on Beckham. He stood near the blankets, his smile gentle, his hands open. "Surprise," he said softly. "Welcome to your picnic, Emily." For a moment, Emily just stared at him, her lips trembling, as though her heart was struggling to catch up to what her eyes were seeing. Then she let out a laugh, a pure, unfiltered sound that filled the room and seemed to chase away the shadows clinging to the walls. Beckham knelt down, patting the blanket. "Shall we sit?" Emily hurried forward, tugging her mother along, and they settled onto the blanket together. Beckham opened a basket, pulling out sandwiches carefully wrapped in parchment paper. He placed one in Emily's small hands. "Turkey and cheese," he said. "Simple, but it reminds me of my own picnics." Emily giggled as she unwrapped it. "Dad used to make peanut butter and jelly. He always got the jelly everywhere." Beckham laughed softly. "That sounds like something I would do too." They ate together, the room filled with the simple sounds of chewing, unwrapping, and sipping lemonade. Emily's eyes danced as she took each bite, savoring not just the food but the atmosphere. The blanket under her, the soft glow of lanterns above, the warmth of her mother's hand in hers. After a while, Beckham reached for the cupcakes, presenting one with white frosting and rainbow sprinkles. Emily gasped, clapping her hands. "Cupcakes? Careful," Sarah said gently. "Remember what the doctor said, just a little." Emily nodded solemnly, then took a small bite, closing her eyes as if the sweetness transported her somewhere far away. When she opened them again, they sparkled. "It tastes like the park," she declared. Beckham chuckled. "That's exactly what we wanted." As they ate, he pulled a small speaker from the basket and turned it on. The sound of birdsong filled the room, mingled with the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Emily looked around in wonder, her imagination painting over the hospital walls until she was no longer in a sterile room but on a grassy hill with the sun on her face. She leaned closer to Beckham, whispering, "This feels real." "It is real," Beckham replied. Because it's happening right here with you and your mom. They spent nearly an hour sharing stories. Emily spoke about her father, how he used to make silly jokes, how he once chased after a runaway balloon while everyone laughed. She described the way he always carried a thermos of lemonade, insisting that no picnic was complete without it. Sarah chimed in, her voice trembling with both sorrow and joy, filling in the details that Emily couldn't remember. Beckham listened intently, nodding, laughing at the funny parts, his eyes soft at the bittersweet ones. He shared stories of his own childhood, of parks in East London, of days when his family didn't have much but made the most of what they had. He spoke of his children now, how they teased him about his sandwiches, how they once tried to build a picnic fort in the backyard. Emily's laughter bubbled over, genuine and unguarded. At one point, Beckham reached into the basket and pulled out a small notebook with a set of crayons. He handed it to Emily. "Every good picnic needs a memory," he said. "Maybe you can draw this one so you'll always have it." Emily's face lit up as she opened the notebook. She began sketching quickly, her small hands moving with determination. She drew the blanket, the baskets, her mother smiling, Beckham sitting beside them. When she was done, she turned it around shyly. The picture was rough, childlike, but full of heart. At the top, she had written in large, uneven letters, "My picnic." Beckham's throat tightened as he studied it. "That's beautiful, Emily," he said. "I think you're an artist." Emily grinned proudly, then slipped the notebook against her chest as if holding a treasure. As the afternoon wore on, they lay back on the blanket, staring up at the lantern-lit ceiling as if it were a sky. Emily pointed at one lantern and said, "That one's the sun." She pointed at another. "And that's a cloud." Beckham followed her lead, pointing to one in the corner. "That one looks like a soccer ball." Emily giggled, shaking her head. "Everything looks like a soccer ball to you." They laughed together, the sound weaving into the soft background of birdsong. For Sarah, watching her daughter's face glow with happiness was almost overwhelming. She reached out, taking Beckham's hand for a brief moment, her eyes brimming with gratitude. No words were spoken, but the message was clear. "Thank you for giving us this." As the picnic wound down, Emily grew quiet, her small body tiring from the excitement. She leaned against her mother, her eyelids heavy but her smile still in place. "This was the best day," she murmured. "Better than the park. Because Dad is here too in the stories." Sarah kissed the top of her head, tears spilling freely now. Beckham swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. He placed a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. "Your dad would be so proud of you," he said softly. "I can feel it." Emily nodded, eyes half closed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think we can do it again someday?" Beckham's heart clenched. He forced a smile, his voice steady. "I promise you, Emily, this isn't the last picnic. There will be more. Maybe not outside, but right here, wherever you are." Her small hand reached for his, squeezing weakly before she drifted into sleep against her mother's chest. The room fell into a hush, the lanterns casting a warm glow, the projector meadow stretching endlessly across the wall. Beckham sat in silence, watching her breathe, feeling the weight of what they had just shared. This was more than a picnic. This was a bridge between memory and hope, between loss and love. And though he knew the battle Emily faced was far from over, he also knew that today she had won something important, joy. When he finally rose to leave, Beckham looked back at the room one last time. The blankets were rumpled, crumbs scattered, crayons still open on the floor. It looked like any ordinary family picnic, and that was the beauty of it. He closed the door softly, his heart full yet heavy, already thinking of what more could be done. Outside, the city continued as always, indifferent to what had happened in that small hospital room. But for Emily, for Sarah, and for Beckham himself, the world had shifted just a little. A simple picnic had become something far greater, a memory that would live on, shining brighter than the sterile lights of the ward, as real and enduring as love itself. The days following the picnic unfolded with a quiet kind of magic. Inside the pediatric wing of the hospital, nurses noticed how Emily's smile lingered longer, how she hummed softly to herself when coloring, how she clutched the little notebook Beckham had given her as though it were a lifeline. Sarah, her mother, moved through the ward with lighter steps, her shoulders no longer bowed under the full weight of grief and worry. Something had shifted. It was as if the picnic had not only given Emily a memory, but had also reawakened a part of her spirit that had been dormant since her father's passing. Beckham returned to visit discreetly a few days later. He wore a simple jacket, trying to blend in, but of course staff and families recognized him. They respected his privacy, though, understanding instinctively that he wasn't there for attention. He was there for Emily. He found her in her room, sitting up in bed with her mother beside her, both poring over the notebook of drawings. Emily's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. "David," she called, her voice bright. Beckham smiled, pulling a chair closer. "Hello, artist. Have you been adding to your masterpiece?" Emily proudly held up a new drawing. It was of the picnic again, but this time with even more details. The cupcakes, the lanterns, the basket of apples. She had drawn herself, her mom, and Beckham all laughing together. At the top she had written in uneven letters, "My family picnic." Beckham's throat tightened, but he forced a smile. "That's incredible, Emily. You've captured it perfectly." Sarah reached for Beckham's hand, squeezing it with a gratitude that words couldn't fully express. "You gave her back something we thought we'd lost," she whispered. Beckham shook his head gently. "She gave it to us. She reminded us what matters." Later that evening, Beckham sat alone in his hotel room again, staring at the notebook Emily had insisted he take for safekeeping until her next drawing. He turned the pages slowly, seeing the world through her eyes, simple, colorful, filled with love. It struck him deeply. For years, he had been celebrated for his ability to bend a ball, for the stadiums that roared his name, for the endorsements and accolades. But here, in a few pages of crayon sketches, was a reminder that greatness was measured in much smaller, quieter acts. That night, Beckham couldn't sleep. His mind spun with an idea that had begun forming the moment Emily fell asleep on her mother's shoulder during the picnic. Why should this kind of moment be rare? Why should only one child get to feel the joy of a picnic when so many others long for something equally simple but out of reach? What if this could happen not just here but everywhere? The next morning, Beckham picked up the phone. He called old friends, charity partners, contacts from his foundation. He explained the vision in plain words: to bring the experience of a picnic into hospitals across the country. Not a charity gala, not a publicity stunt, but a series of intimate, personal events where children and families could reconnect through something as simple as sitting on a blanket together. He called it Picnic of Hope. At first, there was silence on the other end of the line. But then, slowly, responses came back. "Yes, we'll help. Tell us what you need." Within a week, the plan had life. Designers offered to create portable picnic kits, sterilized blankets, lightweight baskets, projectors with meadow landscapes. Nutritionists volunteered to craft safe, hospital-approved picnic menus. Volunteers signed up to carry the baskets, to string lanterns, to play acoustic guitar songs that children loved. Beckham didn't want his face on posters. He insisted that this wasn't about him. "If my name helps open a door, fine," he told his team, but the focus must always be the kids. Meanwhile, Emily became the silent heart of the project. Beckham visited her again before flying back to Los Angeles for other commitments. He sat by her bed telling her about the idea. Her eyes widened with wonder. "So other kids can have picnics too?" she asked. "Yes," Beckham said, smiling, "because you showed me how much it matters." Emily hugged him tightly, her thin arms surprising him with their strength. "Then it's our project. You and me." Beckham felt his chest swell. "Our project," he agreed. News of the first official Picnic of Hope spread quietly at first, through word of mouth among hospitals and families. There were no red carpets, no paparazzi. In a children's hospital in Chicago, volunteers rolled out a blanket in a recreation room, set up a projector showing a sunlit park, and filled baskets with simple snacks. Parents wept softly as their children laughed, the walls of the hospital melting away for a few hours. In Dallas, nurses strung paper lanterns while a local musician strummed a guitar, and children clapped along. In Miami, a picnic featured tropical fruits and soft Caribbean music, reflecting the local culture. Each event was unique, but the spirit was the same: joy in the midst of struggle. Beckham attended some, slipping in quietly, always dressed simply. He never made speeches. Instead, he sat cross-legged on blankets, sharing food, listening to stories, laughing with children. At one event, a little boy with leukemia handed him a drawing that read, "Best Day Ever." Beckham folded it carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket as if it were a medal. As the months passed, Picnic of Hope grew. Celebrities heard about it and offered to sponsor, but Beckham remained firm. No spotlight, no self-promotion. Donations were accepted, but only if they respected the intimacy of the mission. The project was about children, not headlines. Back in New York, Emily's condition remained delicate, but her spirit soared every time Beckham visited. They would talk about future picnics, about how each one was different. She loved hearing about the tropical picnic in Miami and asked if maybe one day she could have a Hawaiian-themed one with flower garlands. Beckham promised they would try. One afternoon, as Emily rested, Sarah pulled Beckham aside. Her eyes were damp, but her smile was radiant. "I don't know how long Emily has," she admitted softly. "But what you've given her, what you've given us, it's beyond measure. You've given her hope. And that means everything." Beckham felt tears sting his eyes. He clasped Sarah's hands. "She's given me more than I could ever give her. She's taught me what really matters." In time, the project reached hospitals across the country. Photos began to circulate, not glossy magazine spreads, but snapshots shared by grateful parents on social media. Children grinning with crumbs on their faces, blankets dotted with juice boxes, mothers and fathers laughing through tears. Each image carried the same unspoken truth. Hope had found its way into the most unlikely of places. For Beckham, every new picnic was a reminder of that first day with Emily. He carried her drawing in his bag, pulling it out often when traveling, letting it ground him amid the chaos of airports and meetings. It reminded him that beneath the roar of the world, there was a quiet kind of greatness found only in giving. Months later, on a crisp autumn day, Beckham returned to the New York hospital. Emily was thinner, her strength wavering, but her smile was as fierce as ever. She showed him another drawing, a giant blanket stretching across the world, children of every color and shape sitting together, sharing food. At the top, she had written, "Picnic of Hope Everywhere." Beckham felt his chest tighten, his voice nearly breaking as he whispered, "That's exactly what we're going to do, Emily. You've already started it." As he left the hospital that day, Beckham paused at the doorway, looking back one last time. Emily sat on her bed, her mother beside her, the notebook of drawings in her lap. She waved, her smile steady despite the tubes and monitors. In that moment, Beckham knew without doubt that this little girl, with her simple wish for a picnic, had changed him forever. The city outside bustled with its usual noise, but Beckham walked with a new clarity. Stadiums and trophies had defined much of his life, but this quiet legacy of hope was something different, something greater. And so the story of a single picnic in a hospital room grew into a movement, a tide of kindness that swept across America. It carried with it the message that joy need not be grand, that healing could come not just from medicine but from laughter, memory, and togetherness. For Beckham, the lesson was simple yet profound. Happiness could be found on a blanket with a basket of food surrounded by love. And as long as children like Emily dreamed, he would keep building those picnics, one hospital at a time. Because in the end, hope was the greatest gift he could ever pass on.